Hello, everybody. Welcome to another seminar from BAKERpedia, and welcome to our seminar on emulsifiers. My name is Mark Flurka, and I am your host for today. And ours, let me tell you a little bit about our sponsors for today as well. This seminar is brought to you by Lisafra. You may know Lisafra for their world-class baking, yeast, and 170-year heritage, but did you know that Lisafra has solutions to optimize machinability, strength, and volume in all types of baked goods? Look them up at lisafra.com. And our other sponsor is Prova USA, extracting the essentials, your natural choice for sweet brown extracts and flavors. Prova USA is a third-generation certified woman-owned family business founded on an entrepreneurial spirit with the expertise and scale of a global business operating in more than 70 countries on 5 continents with 6 offices. No matter the size of the business they serve, they approach each one with the same dedicated focus. I will now share a presentation with you on emulsifiers, and I also want to point out and remind everyone that you can also download the content of this presentation, essentially, in a pocket guide from BAKERpedia.com. It's our brand new pocket guide. So I'm going to share the presentation, and there we go. Okay. So here's our introduction slide. So once again, brought to you by Prova, Extracting the Essentials, and by Lisafra, right? So our agenda is we're going to talk about what are emulsifiers, and we're going to talk about emulsifiers in the baking industry specifically, right? And the function of emulsifiers in the baking industry, and what is HLB? We hear this a lot, and a lot of people aren't always aware of what that is, right? And of course, the usage of emulsifiers in the baking industry. So, what are emulsifiers? Another word that is used for emulsifiers often is a surfactant, which is short for surface active agent. And with that, emulsifiers play a key role in the baking industry, influencing the physiochemical properties of baked goods, functioning as stabilizers. These compounds facilitate the dispersion of water and fat, phases within the dough or batter matrices, as well as in frostings and fillings. So facilitate the dispersion of water and fat phases within the dough or batter matrices, as well as in frostings and fillings. So this is key. And so it adjusts the surface tension and things like that. We're going to get into that some more yet, right? So here you can see a basic emulsifier model, so that an emulsifier has a lipophilic tail and a hydrophilic head. So what does that mean? Well, lipophilic comes from the Greek, meaning lipo, meaning oil or fat, and philic, meaning friendly or loving. So the oil-loving tail, the tail points to the oil, and the hydrophilic is hydro, meaning water, and water philic, meaning loving again, of course. So it's water loving. So the hydrophilic head is what attaches to the water to bring these two together in an emulsion. Emulsifiers play a fundamental role in stabilizing and facilitating the formation of emulsions, colloidal systems in which immiscible liquids such as oil and water are finely dispersed. Think of whipping cream, for example. That cream in the cream is all very finely dispersed. That is a very typical emulsion, right? Or mayonnaise or things like that. The hydrophilic portion of the emulsifier interacts with water molecules, while the lipophilic portion, the tail, interacts with oil or fat. reducing interfacial tension and preventing phase separation. Wow. Preventing interfacial, reducing interfacial tension and preventing phase separation. That sounds really cool, doesn't it? So for those of us who aren't as sciencey versed, um, what that essentially means is that water has a tension, and so does the oil. And so, but they have different amount of tension. And so the emulsifier is essentially reducing that tension between the two so that they can combine together. A really cool science demonstration that is done with this for school kids and things like that is if you put some whole milk on a plate and you put a couple of drops of food coloring on it, and then you drop some soap onto that, and you'll see it'll start to spin around in circles and all kinds of colors because the soap is your emulsifier. It's reducing the surface tension and allowing everything to start to interact, and just by making contact. So the function of emulsifiers in the baking industry. These compounds act as stabilizers, ensuring a uniform dispersion of water and fat in the dough or batter. For example, water and oil do not mix well. By forcing them to mix in a system, they will naturally separate over time. By working as dough strengtheners, emulsifiers impact the physical properties of the dough, making it easier to handle and machine. In batter aeration, emulsifiers enhance the stability of the air-water interface, promoting the incorporation and retention of air bubbles during mixing. This results in a lighter and fluffier texture in the final product. So the first is forcing oil and water to mix together. As I mentioned earlier, great example is salad dressings, mayonnaise, that type of thing. But we also do that in a lot of our doughs and batters where we want the oil and the water to combine nicely and disperse well. So the emulsifiers help to facilitate that. And also, it helps in strengthening the dough for making it more extensible for like rising in the oven, but also in making it more malleable and machinable in processing in our dough systems, right? And then, of course, batter aeration. Certain types of emulsifiers will, in the beating process, help to incorporate more air. Even eggs are part of a natural emulsifier that are used, as you know, in sort of just foaming eggs with sugar, for example, right? Also, the functions of emulsifiers in baking continued is by improving aeration and stabilizing emulsions within the dough or batter. Emulsifiers lead the way, introducing more air cells into the system. This increased quantity in air cells results in higher volume. So you get a bigger, fluffier loaf, right? Emulsifiers improve the softness of the crumb. That's also great for texture, for shelf life, obviously. In baked goods, by interacting with starch and gluten proteins, they form complexes with these components, modifying the structure of the bread and cake matrix. So if you have emulsifiers added to your bread, it helps prevent the starches from recrystallizing too early. In other words, be going stale quickly. And it prevents the proteins from becoming too hard and stiff. So that way it's an aid that helps you keep your bread soft longer, right? Since emulsifiers stabilize the air-water interface, they create a uniform cell structure. This contributes to the development of a consistent crumb structure and influences sensory aspects such as taste and mouthfeel. So that it's not only just about the softness of the bread, but also that we have a nice, even crumb structure, particularly in like a white bread, like a toast bread. Um, so that if you have a open coarse structure, when you eat it, it will taste very dry. It may be very rough on the palate. Whereas when the cell structure is very nice and fine and even, it's a nice, soft, moist, palatable bread. So what is HLB? As I hinted at, this is an interesting one for a lot of people. And we talked about hydrophilic and lipophilic already. And so HLB is an essential characteristics of emulsifier. is their hydrophilic lipophilic balance. So HLB means hydrophilic, lipophilic, and balance, which serves as a measurement of the magnitude and dominance of the emulsifier's hydrophilic and lipophilic components. The HLB scale spans from 0 to 20, acting as an indicator of the size and potency of these regions within the molecule. So if you need something where you're doing more of a fat in water emulsion, you need something that is more hydrophilic because you have more water than you have fat. And so you need a higher HLB value. When you have something that is water in oil, where there's more oil, more fat, then you need something that is more lipophilic. And here's some examples of usages of emulsifiers in the baking industry. And this first table kind of covers mostly the dough and bread side, and the main sort of focus here. And so lecithin, as we can see with all of them, the usage levels range from 0.2 to 0.5%. So again, a little goes a long way. Lecithin has an HLB of 4 to 7. It depends how the lecithin is treated in terms of what your HLB value is going to be there, right? And it's used in cakes, breads, and pastry for improving aeration, crumb softening, and provides dough conditioning as well. Here's a fun one. Diacetyl tartaric acid esters of monoglycerides. Well, it's a mouthful, and most of the time we just say datum. And even on the ingredient declaration, it just says datum. So if you see that on an ingredient deck datum, that's what it is. Same level, much higher HLB. So this is more water loving and enhances dough strength, often used in bread and rolls to improve volume, texture, and machinability. You get good oven spring with datums, I can tell you that, right? And then there's another one, little bit of a, not as much of a mouthful, but a little bit, sodium stearyl lactylate. And we commonly in the industry just refer to this as SSL. And that is a 3 to 5 HLB. So a little bit lower than lecithin slightly. And it's commonly utilized in bread and cake mixes to improve volume, texture, and emulsification. I see it a lot in high sugar sweetbreads and things like that. It works really well there. And then you have CSL, calcium stearyl lactylate. And they're same usage levels, but as you could see, a higher HLB value, so more of a dough conditioner, enhancing volume and texture in bread and rolls and cakes, so more on the water-loving side again, right? And of course, mono and diglycerides, one of the baker's favorite tools. Same usage level again, but the HLB varies because depending on what the producer does for you or how they create the monodiglycerides, the processing and so on, they can change and adjust that HLB to be where you need it, right? And it's widely used in various baked goods, including bread, cakes, and cookies for emulsification, texture improvement, and shelf life extension. It's really good at helping keep cookies soft. That's one thing I've often noticed. Right? And so here we could see a repeat of lecithin because now this table is a little more focused on the cake and cookie side of things. So again, lecithin, our usage levels are all the same across the board. Now these usage levels where we say 0.2 to 0.5%, these are essentially good manufacturing practices. Less might in unique situations be sufficient for you, depending on your combination of things. More tends to usually be almost like throwing money out the window. But there again, it depends on your formula and processing. Sometimes a little more might be needed than the 0.5%, but most common usage level is 0.2 to 0.5. And so the application of lecithin in cakes is for improved aeration and crumb softening, and it does provide some dough conditioning. So here's another semi-mouthful, polysorbate. you'll usually see polysorbate 60, 80, and 85. Polysorbate 60, I think, is the one that we see the most common. And there the HLB varies as well. And it's widely used in cakes, somewhat in cookies, and a lot in frostings to extend shelf life and improve crumb color and improve volume. It's really good in cakes and frostings for volume, and cookies more for extending shelf life and improving softness, right? And then one that's used a lot in high ratio cakes in North America, particularly, is we generally refer to as PGME, poly, poly, propylene glycol monoesters. I was doing so well. um, and here the HLB is 3 to 5. This is used in cakes and non-dairy whipped products like whipped toppings and things like that. They improve volume and texture and provide stability against syneresis. So this is important in that it's not only just dispersing, it's basically forming a really stable emulsion so that the water doesn't drop out of the blend. And that is what we refer to as syneresis. And that is really important with icings. And in cake batters that are have a lot of high water mixing or cold water that it's added to the system, it works really well there too. And then similarly, we have polyglycerol esters or PGE. And that has a much higher, bigger HLB range, but a much higher value available most of the time. It can go right up to 14. And it's commonly used in cake batter with little or no oil or fat content. They help aeration and aid in the stabilization of foams. So if you think of a sponge cake type batter where there is little to no fat, very little fat compared to a high ratio cake batter, that is where PGE works really well. And then we also have ethoxylated monos. Like mono diglycerides, it varies as to how it's produced, and it's used to improve the aeration of cake batters primarily. And then another interesting one is alpha dextrins. And alpha dextrins is quite interesting because it's usually added to icings, cake batters, and sponge cakes, and they can also be added in gluten-free and egg-free baking products. So alpha dextrins really help with structure forming and foaming and stuff where you're replacing eggs, or in gluten-free situations in some of helping provide some of that dough structure. They stabilize emulsions and they can control the solubility and dispersion. That really depends a lot on the type of premix you are making. If it is a high ratio cake premix, it would be most commonly a PGME, but you might include some monodiglycerides or other things to help support that, right? When it's a foaming type of sponge cake emulsifier, this could be the PGE or the ethoxylated, and also sometimes in combination with polysorbate 60 or 60 or 80. So in many cases, one will do, and then it depends on other components within your formula, how much water you have there, how much egg, other things that are unique to it that are very important. There's never really a simple answer to that fits everything. But that is the place to start for cake mixes. The ratio would be in that sense, up to 0.5%. So 0.5% of 1 ton would be 50 kilos, right? And that would be the maximum, right? Now, it depends on what you are trying to accomplish with each of the emulsifiers. Monoglycerides and lecithin will work in combination to support each other. Lecithin works reasonably well but it is not a very efficient emulsifier in a cake premix. Monodiglycerides and PGME would probably be the first ones I would try. In bread and rolls, the best type of emulsifier usually to use is monodiglycerides. That gives you as we like to say, the best bang for your buck, right? Because it helps not only in extending crumb softness and extending shelf life of the bread, it also helps in bread processing and the extensibility, molding, panning, all of these things, right? It is very multiversed, right? Well, if you're not worried about um, clean label, then you can also include some of the other emulsifiers like the polysorbate for volume or PGME for good emulsification and stability. But the alpha dextrins is one of the ones that is really great for eggless, right? Because it not only helps with the emulsification, it's helping with structure as well. And lecithin, of course, helps with emulsification as well. It's not as beneficial in an eggless cake for structure. So you kind of can't replace it with just one thing. You kind of have to need a combination. But alpha dextrins on their own, they do the most of the work. They do a fantastic job. That is the high volume ones. PGME to some extent, PGE or the polypropylene glycol esters is better, and the polysorbates work really well, right? Those are really great at getting high specific gravity of a batter. So in other words, by high, I mean by being able to get like a point 0.3 or point 0.5, like between point 0.5 and point 0.3 a specific gravity of like, which is like usually a target for sponge cake, right? Um, in my apprenticeship, we always targeted point 0.5 for sponge cake batter, and we had a blend of ethoxylated and polysorbate uh, in our recipe in our mix. They're more or less the same. We say monoglycerides, and they are most commonly mono and diglycerides, but they are chemically different, right? But how we use them is very similar. And so by adding the diglyceride bond, it changes the structure and the HLB value a little bit and things like that. So mono and diglycerides is what's most commonly used in breads and things like that. And monoglycerides is usually, I think, more used more in beverages. Um, Usually, they are specialty ingredients. They are processed in a way to perform those functions specifically for baked goods. One of our sponsors, Arla Foods, they produce great whey protein isolates for specific applications, either, for example, for gluten-free type doughs or stuff, or for making cakes or cookies or breads, regular breads and things like that. Um, Wheat protein is also usually done as it's a wheat protein isolate that is used. And again, it's how it is treated, how it is processed, right? And Manildra, they are very have a lot of expertise in that area, and so they have wheat protein isolates that are good at providing emulsification for aeration or emulsification for binding and holding things together, right? And last, vegetable. Vegetable can be a variety of things. It can be things like what is popular in some of the egg-free sphere is the faba, aquafaba, which is the retarded liquid from chickpeas. Um, And there's been a lot of work is being done in that area to use chickpeas and chickpea protein, other bean proteins, and lentil proteins as emulsifiers and stuff. So they are not 100% egg replacers yet, but they are uh, good emulsifiers for a variety of applications. No, there's GMPs. There's a limited amount that is under good manufacturing practices. SSL is not harmful in any way, and it's not useful to use much more than 0.5 or even 1% in any case, right? Um, the one of the things to be aware of is the reactions that SSL can have with other ingredients. Depending on the granulation or the type of SSL, it can react with calcium propionate, for example, and it creates a freckled or mottled look on the bun. A laminated dough, you would use something like monodiglycerides sparingly on the dough side. And I say sparingly because the thing about most laminated doughs is when you're making things like croissants or Danish pastries or puff pastry, is that you want that crispiness. And if you use too high a level of monodiglycerides, you will get very soft crust, which is what you don't really want, right? So to maintain that crispiness, you want to use a relatively low level. And what it will do is it'll help keep the crumb soft inside. So if you look at something like the 7-day croissants, they use monodiglycerides in the dough to help keep them soft because those things have like a 30-day shelf life or something like that. Again, that also depends on if you're trying to do clean label or not. If you're not necessarily too concerned about clean label, uh, PGME or poly or PGE are both reasonably good replacements. They don't aerate quite as well as polysorbate 60, but they do a reasonably good job. Other than that, it's lecithin. Lecithin helps quite a bit with getting a smooth and creamy buttercream, but not as quite as much with the aeration. And so then you would, with lecithin, you would need to use some other protein in combination with that. Um, in a classic pastry type buttercream, it would be like an Italian meringue, like a marshmallow buttercream, right? So it depends what your objective is in replacing the polysorbate 60. In other words, we always want to ask ourselves, why do I want to replace this? And that becomes sort of the guide rails for how you're going to replace it in terms of what you can use. As mentioned earlier, you can also download the Pocket Guide from BAKERpedia.com, and that'll give you the content of this information that we've discussed. This presentation will be available on YouTube in about a week or so. Always my pleasure to host these. It's very informative and always interesting to see where everybody is from. And so I bid you all a wonderful morning or afternoon or evening from snowy Cape Breton Island, where we're still digging out from under 6 feet of snow. And we'll see you all in the next seminar.